So I will say once again, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Employer Training Opportunity, New Perceptions in Disability, a Windmills training. We are recording today's session, so hopefully you've hit the OK that might have been showing on your screen saying you understand today's session will be recorded. Before we get started, please allow me to go over a few housekeeping items. We do have ASL interpreters with us today. We do ask that you please turn off your videos if you are not presenting, because for ASL users, other motions on other screens can be distracting. So thank you all so much for following that. We also have, our ASL interpreter is spotlighted. If you cannot see them, you may need to change your view, and your view can be found at the top in the upper right-hand corner. And hopefully you'll be able to see myself, my co-host Mary Fleck, and the ASL interpreter. We also have a CART provider, so somebody who's taking real-time captioning. So if you need captions, on the bottom of your screen, you will see a Show Captions or CC button. So if you click that, all of the captions from our CART provider should be showing for you. Okay, and while we do have the chat open for everybody, and I've seen a chat come through, if you have the need to send a question, we do ask that you use the Q&A question and answer box also found at the bottom of the screen. This way it won't read that out loud, and so somebody who's using a screen reader just won't have to be disrupted, if you will. So again, just a few things we're asking. Please make sure your videos are off unless you happen to be the facilitator or the ASL interpreter. Please check your views, make sure you can see everybody. And if you need the live transcript, please click the Show Captions or CC button at the bottom of your screen. All right, everyone. Well, with that, I think we are ready to begin. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my slide. And then we'll do introductions, I promise. Whew, so many things showing at the bottom of this screen right now. It was a little hard to pick the right one, but here we go. I believe I have that up now. Let me pull this up. So again, welcome everybody to the Rehabilitation Services Administration. That is who is conducting this training today. Windmills Training, New Perceptions in Disability. Here is some housekeeping just for today's session. It's a little different than the accessibility housekeeping. So today we are asking everybody to please be respectful of all ideas. Please make space for all, meaning all ideas, all thoughts, all comments are welcome today. And we want you to know today that it's okay to be uncomfortable. This is a safe space for everybody, and we want you to be comfortable with being uncomfortable sometimes, and to take care of yourself, including the need to take a moment and process the information and how you are feeling about it. Of course, if you have other needs, get up, stretch, use the restroom. We really want you to take care of yourself today. I'm going to do some basic introductions today about who we are, why we're here, and what we hope to accomplish. My name is Natalie Guzman, and I work for the Department of Economic Security Rehabilitation Services Administration. I work with all of our programs, but you folks probably know our programs mainly as vocational rehabilitation. And we have a slide on that, so I will shamelessly show it on the next slide. What is vocational rehabilitation? The vocational rehabilitation program, we provide a variety of services to job seekers with disabilities to overcome barriers to employment. We know that you're going to see some of our folks in a couple of weeks at the Dream Job Fair on April 18th, next week, as a matter of fact. And that's why we wanted to come talk to you. Of course, VR, the ultimate goal is to prepare for, enter into, or retain competitive and integrated employment. And of course, the VR program is a public program funded through a federal and state partnership and administered, by the Rehabilitation Services Administration under the State of Arizona Department of Economic Security. And I'm going to go back up one slide and ask my co-facilitator, Mary, to come on camera and introduce herself.
Good morning. My name is Mary Kay Flack. I'm the Regional Program Manager for Southern Arizona. I cover 14 offices from Casa Grande South. It's a pleasure to be here this morning.
And thank you so much, Mary, for introducing yourself. I will say it is a pleasure to be co-hosting with the wonderful Mary Fleck from Tucson. She is your local contact there in Tucson. And again, what we really hope to accomplish here, and so we mentioned the title, right, of our perceptions disability awareness, but we really want you to know that that's really the purpose of all of Windmills training. It's designed to increase awareness of the roles that attitudes play in the employment of people with disabilities. So we're here today to share some information with you all to help you examine your emotions, your stereotypes, and potential attitudinal barriers to make you more effective when not only working with people with disabilities, but also being more effective hiring managers and hiring people out there with disabilities. So we hope that through these group discussions that you'll reach an understanding of those attitudes and maybe learn methods and techniques, to assist you again in becoming more effective of working and hiring people with disabilities. All right. Well, I already showed my shameless plug of vocational rehabilitation because I certainly wanted you folks to be aware of where we're coming to you from. I know. Admit someone here into the waiting room. So glad that you're here. So let's talk about our session today, Windmills' New Perceptions in Disability. So right off the bat, we want you folks to know that we all have a lived experience around disability. Perhaps, and I certainly want to recognize anybody who has that lived personal experience, meaning identifying, living, and working as an individual with a disability. Also, I know every single person on the line today has a personal experience working with an individual who has a disability. And that could mean certainly in your professional lives, as I know many of you do, but I'm going to say this in line with community interactions because we also know that people with disability, it's not only ourselves, it's our friends, our family, our coworkers, and just those that we see out and about in the community. And lastly, today, the focus of this module, we really want you to get curious. So we really hope that it piques your curiosity and challenges some of your current perceptions related to the disability world. And I've borrowed this quote from a colleague who used it in their presentation, but I loved it so much. And so I'm just going to share it. It says, curiosity is the essence of human existence. Who are we? Where are we? Where do we come from? Where are we going? I don't know. I don't have any answers to those questions. I don't know what's over there around the corner, but I want to find out. Mary?
Okay. So why is this important? And just to give you some statistics, for all age groups, the employment population ratio was much lower for people with disabilities at 22.5% than those without a disability, which is 65.8%. Unemployment rates were also much higher for people with disabilities at 7.2% than those with no disability at 3.5% across all educational attainment groups. And then workers with disabilities were nearly twice as likely to work part-time at 29% as workers with no disability at 16%. And so why is this important? Today, negative judgment and misconceptions still follow disabled people. We coined this mindset as ableism, which is the social prejudice and discrimination against people with disabilities. It is common and comes in many forms. It can range from obvious contempt or harm to holding incorrect assumptions. Also, it can be neglecting to accommodate the needs of disabled people. So it's just some more statistics. 22.8% of all working age adults need workplace accommodation, but less than half actually receive them. Job applicants whose cover letter mentioned that they have a disability are 26% less likely to get a call back. And 38% of people believe people with disabilities aren't as productive as their non-disabled peers. And then according to the CDC, on the next few slides we've got here, 1 in 4 Americans, or approximately 26% of adults in the United States, have some type of disability. More than 70% of individuals with disabilities have a non-apparent or an invisible disability, such as low vision, hearing loss, chronic pain, cancer patients, MS, and fatigue. There are approximately 54 million Americans with disabilities, 20 million are of working age. 82% of disabilities are acquired as a result of age, illness, accident, or warfare. 2 in 5 individuals over the age of 65 have a disability. 1 in 4 of the women have a disability, and 2 in 5 non-Hispanics, American Indians, Alaska Natives have a disability. In addition, 1 in 5 Caucasians have a disability, 1 in 4 African Americans have a disability, 1 in 6 Hispanics have a disability, and 1 in 4 veterans have a service-related disability, which amount to 4.7 million veterans having a service-related disability.
Thank you, Mary, for sharing those facts with us and reminding us why they're so important as we hear about the prevalence of disability. Disability, as Mary mentioned, covers all races, gender, and age groups. As we often say in the disability community, if you do not have a disability, the likelihood of you acquiring a disability goes up as you get older. So we are now going to, as we think about those facts, we're going to do an activity. We are going to do an activity. The first part, we just want you to think about it. So this first slide here asks if you, so you personally, were living with one of these disabilities, what do you believe you could not do? We have 4 disabilities on this slide. And again, as you think about them, as you look at them, I just want you to think about those initial thoughts. Just notice what comes up for you in your automatic response. We don't want you to share just yet. We are going to be asking you to share some thoughts, but we just want you to think about things. So blind, I have the word or the disability blind on here. And I'm going to be reading some definitions of sorts. So blind. Legally blind means your vision is 20/200 or less in your better eye, or your field of vision is less than 20 degrees. Cerebral palsy. Cerebral palsy is a condition caused by damage to the developing brain during pregnancy, birth, or shortly after birth. It can affect body movement, muscle control, muscle coordination, muscle tone, reflex, posture, and balance. People with cerebral palsy, or CP, may also have visual, learning, hearing, speech, epilepsy, and/or intellectual impairments. Psychiatric disability. It's a mental health condition that substantially limits one or more major life activities. Examples are depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, and bipolar disorder. Lastly, traumatic brain injury. Traumatic brain injury, or TBI, can be caused by a forceful bump, blow, or jolt to the head or body, or from an object that pierces the skull and enters the brain. Some types of TBI can cause temporary or short-term problems with normal brain function, including problems with how the person thinks. Oh, my apologies. Change the page without meaning to. So TBI can cause temporary or short-term problems with normal brain function, including problems with how the person thinks, understands, moves, communicates, and acts. So again, the question on the screen is, if you were living with one of these disabilities, what do you believe you could not do? And I'm just going to hold that for a minute for you, for everyone to think about that, including myself. Okay. So on the next slide, it says, what do you see? And I'm going to describe this image. Some people look at this image and they see a vase, a white vase outlined by black space. Some people see two faces, two black silhouette faces staring at one another. And the point of this slide is about perspective. Another way of saying perspective might be point of view. And your point of view and your perspective can make a difference in the outcome. On the next slide, for example, we see two figures here, and they're both pointing at the same object. Figure on the left looks at the object, points at it, and is saying 6, the number 6. The other figure on the other side looks at the object, points at it, and says 9. It's the number 9. So again, it's another example of perspective or point of view. This next slide says changing the perspective. So now I'm going to ask you a different question. If you were living with one of these disabilities, what do you believe you could do? And these are the same as listed on our previous slide: blind, cerebral palsy, psychiatric disability, and traumatic brain injury. And again, not asking you to share just yet, but I just want you again to think about these disabilities and ask, if you were living with one of these disabilities, what do you believe you could do? All right, everybody. Now comes my favorite part. Now we want to hear, we want to talk about it, and we really want to hear from you folks out there. And so let's talk about the first question that I asked everybody. I said, let's talk about what you feel you couldn't do. What challenges do you think living with the disability might present to you? And I have to say, got a couple of questions in here, and they're really comments, but I appreciate them. So someone said, there is nothing I cannot do, but at certain times I have limitations that I need to support in order to do the thing I want to do. And then they put a dash TBI. And then another person answered, anything I want to do. Which I really appreciate both of those responses. To me, these folks are saying to me, it really doesn't matter necessarily the type of disability, because I believe I can do anything I want to do. Even if I need support, then I'll use that support and accomplish what I need to do. What are some other gut reactions? Do we have anybody out there who maybe even wants to come off chat and share with us? How did this make you feel going through this activity? Maybe you want to talk about being asked what you couldn't do. Maybe you want to chat or talk about what you could do. Anybody want to share with us today? Oh, we've got quiet people on the line. Ah, thank you so much. Somebody was very brave, Hannah. And she said, first thing that came to mind was driving. Could pose some difficult transportation issues. Thank you, Hannah. Absolutely. I would agree. Perhaps with all of these types of disabilities. Driving, which I would say most people, driving is a very independent thing. Ask young people, most people want to learn how to drive. I have both a question, comment, and a comment. So one, I'm going to read the question, or what somebody put in the Q&A. They said CP, difficulties with moving about. So perhaps not what they couldn't do, but definitely identifying some challenges. If they had cerebral palsy, they're thinking, well, I might just have some difficulties with moving, either moving my body or maybe getting from one place to another, walking, mobility type. Now I'm going to read some comments. I love these comments. Rebecca says, I do not like anyone to tell me what I can and cannot do or what I must do. Good for you, Rebecca. I love that thought, and I'm so glad that you shared that with us. I very much share that as a person. I don't like anyone telling me what I can or cannot do. And while I do not have one of these conditions listed on the board, I have arthritis. And I tell you, I dance twice a week and I work a part-time job that's very physical. And you might imagine sometimes people tell me that I shouldn't do those things because it affects my arthritis, but I believe it's worth it. And so I do other things to take care of myself. Another comment, dealing with misperceptions of coworkers, being considered as unintelligent due to extreme hearing loss and speech differences. And that was Terry. Thank you for sharing that, Terry. I worked with a woman who had speech difficulties. She worked in a call center, and one day she literally lost her voice. She shared with me that by not having a voice, and she would try very hard, but the muscles in her voice constricted her to the point where she had a very raspy, and I'm not going to imitate it, just you could tell she spoke with much difficulty. And she said, you know, Natalie, she said, of all the things and the misperceptions about what people think I can't do or that I'm not intelligent, she said, the thing that bothers me the most is when I'm in public with my children and the perception that I cannot care for them or that I cannot protect them being their mother. She said, that is probably the worst thing somebody could tell me or think of me, even beyond my intelligence, because my kids are everything to me. And she really was. She faced an extraordinary amount of discrimination wherever she went, simply because she could not form those sounds easily as I can do today. Sarah put a question and answer. She said, the first thing I thought was how frustrating and overwhelming it would be to try and do the things I'm used to doing with a disability: reading, walking, engaging with others. Thank you so much for that, Sarah, because I think that's a very honest answer. And I think the word that comes to mind is adjustment. And if something happened, and as you're saying, especially if you're used to doing something one way, and now maybe having to adjust and learn how to do it a different way. I am going to go to the slide. I love these thoughts. Ooh, and I got another one, but I also had asked, let's talk about what you feel you could do, what is possible. And I think there's already some comments here, but here's one from Justin. He says, the first thing I thought of is what jobs a person dealing with blindness couldn't do. And you could find some, but like surgeon or pilot. But many of us with good vision couldn't do that, but we all have our gifts. I believe it's always best to avoid thinking or focusing on what we can't do, and instead we should focus on all the things we can and reach for our dream jobs and go for it. Just try, and try again with a fail forward approach. Yeah. Justin, I couldn't thank you enough for saying those things. And I really have to just say, as the facilitator, your first statement, that really caught me. No one's really ever said that. Bravo, says Rebecca. And I couldn't agree more. It's true. I can't fly a plane. I cannot perform surgery. And my vision is pretty good. It has nothing to do with my vision, right? At least I don't think it has to do with my vision. But you're right. We all have our gifts. And I would say, and some might know, in vocational rehabilitation, you mentioned being a pilot. We worked with a young woman many years ago who has no arms, and we supported her in becoming a pilot. And she was, I think, one of the only people to ever be certified as a pilot and not have arms, because she uses her feet to perform all of the tasks instead of her arms. So as you said, focus on all the things you can do and all the gifts that you have. Because I imagine someone might be out there thinking, well, if you don't have arms, you can't fly a plane. But indeed you can. But indeed you can. Terry says, best work attitude. It's not about what you cannot do, but rather telling the employer, I can bring this to the table if you hire me. As said above, everyone has a gift. Shout them out. Wow. Should have known this group would have some incredible comments to offer. And yes, absolutely. It's not about what you can't do. You didn't go to that interview to share what you can't do. You went to that interview because you read that job description and said, I can do that. And that's what you're going to say at that interview, right? That's what you're going to focus on. I'm going to go to the next slide. Mary.
Okay, so as the slide says, all answers are both right and wrong, and it's just based on what our perceptions are and our life experiences that are driving our thinking. And going back to The blind individual can't be a surgeon. In fact, there's an article I read one time. With assistive technology, there is an individual who is blind that does surgery. So even that is not impossible. You'd be surprised what people can do with different types of assistive technology. So yes, it's based on our life experiences and the interactions that we have had with individuals with disability. But what we have listed are not based on people with disabilities, but ideas about disabilities. And these ideas are driven by our personal experiences. Everyone will have a different perception based on their life experiences. And like we said earlier, 1 in 4 Americans has a disability. So we're probably interacting with individuals with disabilities probably weekly, if not daily, because there are 1 in 4 individuals in the US with a disability.
So as Mary said, we know that oftentimes when people hear those words and they see those words, they think of what they think they know about that disability. And as we said, it's a possible reasons, right? There are many reasons why people react to disabilities, and that's just one. So it's what they think they already know about the disability. It's what we don't know about the disability. Just as, and I'm sure many of you have seen shows where we might look at how that brain works and how our brain likes to fill in gaps. And our perceptions, we do the same thing. Meaning if I meet a person with a type of a disability, that's my answer. And as I view the world, it's only one answer. And so, but that's what happens in our brains and our perceptions is we kind of assume, we make these assumptions, and is there now just facts that we have in our mind? And then the last one is pain. And I say that, and we often talk about pain because, well, often we look at each other as a reflection of ourselves. And sometimes when people see a disability, see a person with a disability, or even a word of disability, they're really thinking about themselves. And they're sometimes really thinking about their shortcomings or their fears about what they couldn't do. And that's what we mean by pain. Because again, we're often the reflections for each other. And so we might see something that says, that's too painful. I don't want that. And I don't ever want to see that for myself. But we know, and boy, does it seem like everyone on this line knows today that the answer is to change our perspective to focus on the person with the disability, not the disability itself. All the comments that you all shared with us seems to tell us that this is exactly what we know is the answer. Because we also know all those facts that Mary presented to us, because I have a type of disability and someone might have that same type of disability, it doesn't mean that it affects us the same. It doesn't mean our perceptions of what we can do, of what I can do, are the same. Because it's an individual perspective. It really is up to that person, as many of you said. It's the attitudes and it's the beliefs. As someone said, it's not about what I can't do. Somebody had added a comment after we talked about that interview and said, you got that interview because your resume showed that you had the skills they were interested in. Exactly. And that's what you're going to talk about in that interview. You're going to focus on those skills and on those abilities. And of course, we know, and again, I just want to thank folks who mentioned that that the key is to open the door to dialogue and to ask individuals what their own personal needs are for success and access. Someone said that earlier. Well, I may need help because of this condition, but it doesn't mean that I can't do it. And it sounds like that person leans into their support, knowing that they need it to do what they want to do. And someone just put in the chat, when talking to others, not all, but very often, about personal disabilities, the one-upmanship begins. Huge area. Personal. Oh, talking to others, not all, about personal, the one-upmanship. I would love to know what you mean more about that, Terry, if you're willing to maybe come off mute and talk a little bit more about it. Yes, please. Ah, that's what I'm thinking that they mean.
Yeah, what Rebecca just posted is definitely what we're talking about. It's like you say, I'm sorry, I'm deaf. Can you please look at me? Oh, yeah, I know all about that. And they immediately start yelling, over enunciating. I have a grandma who's just like that. Or when you're talking about, I was just diagnosed with cancer. And I'm a 7-time cancer survivor, so I know what people are gonna say. Oh yeah, I heard about that. You know, oh, you get so sick and you just can't do. No, do I look like I am so sick that I just can't do anything? I'm 65 years old. I work full time. Don't tell me you know what I've gone through. You know, so they think they're doing it to be empathetic, but what they're actually doing is projecting a misdirected sympathetic response.
Thank you so much for coming off mute, Terry, and talking more about that. And, someone said it, I get it. Mine is worse than yours. And I tell you, and perhaps it's not the best thing to say, but I do think that sometimes that attitude creeps itself into the helping perspective as well, meaning my caseload is harder than yours because I work with people with these types of disability. No, I work with these folks and this is more challenging. And I would say that both are equally not where we want to go, right? It's one thing, as you said, to be truly empathetic and saying, empathy to me is, that person has the floor, not sympathetic, which is sometimes more about myself than it is about the other person. Mary, you look like you've got some thoughts on that. I'd love to hear what you're thinking.
Yeah, I've had that quite a bit too. People trying to do one-upmanship. I do have severe to profound hearing loss, and most individuals that work in the deaf community assume I know sign language, but I grew up in a little farming community of 6,000, and I was the only one in the school district that had any type of hearing loss. So it was a moot point for me to learn sign language. But I understand that when they meet you and they understand that you have a disability, a lot of times they think they're trying to relate to you by saying, oh, I know somebody else that has that too. and it doesn't come across as empathetic is what they are trying to do. It is that one-upmanship. So Terry, thank you for sharing that. That is a very valid point.
Anybody else have anything that they wanted to put in the chat? I did get a direct message. It looked like it was a question, maybe asking if lupus is considered a disability. And I would say, I'm sure that it could be, again, depending on how it's affecting that individual, right? If, and I read that, right? And here's the point, right, of all this perception. That person said lupus is considered a disability. Instantly, my mind thought of two people that I know that both have lupus. It's what we tend to do, right? So I just did kind of what Terry was mentioning, but that's what happens, not as a one-upman ship, hope not, but more of that, oh, I know that word lupus. I think I know because I know these two people, right? But what I would say, number one, I would probably ask those people, and thinking about both of them, I would say, well, one of them absolutely affects her day to day. She has a lot of what they call lupus flares, which is a lot of inflammation all throughout the body, and it's very painful. And my understanding is when that pain happens, it can, cause this person not to be able to function in various areas. Talk about mobility, movement, working, getting up and attending to their self-care. It can definitely interfere with those things. And, you folks on the line here probably know, well, is it a disability depending on Social Security versus, asking a medical provider? But again, I would say that commonality there is how is it affecting that person? And so I would say, yes, oftentimes lupus is considered a disability. And I would say lupus is also one of those disabilities that I believe it fluctuates, right? So somebody doesn't always have the same symptoms all the time. So thinking about the two people that I know, I would also say there's been frustration at times with others not understanding like a hidden disability. Well, you look fine today and you sound fine today and you went to work today. So what do you mean? I think you're perfectly fine. When they would say, well, maybe if you saw me on my worst day or my bad day, you would know why I say it is debilitating and causing me a lot of disruptions in my life. Did you want to say anything there, Mary?
Yeah, I was just going to give another example. Diabetes is another one of those that individuals will say, is this a disability? Typically, diabetes in and of itself is not a disability, just like a lupus diagnosis may not be, but it's how it impacts your activities of daily living. Some individuals with diabetes lose their eyesight, others end up having a leg amputated. And in those cases, yeah, you're going to actually see functional limitations that impair the activities of daily living. So you may have a medical diagnosis of an individual that works with you. And even an individual with a stroke may have actually had enough rehabilitation and physical therapy that there really is no functional limitation related to the stroke anymore. So it relates to your functional limitation to your activities of daily living, if that helps understand that.
Thank you so much, Mary. I would completely agree. And I just wanted to check in with everybody and see if there's any other questions that we can answer out there. I also, as we're kind of winding down with our time, I did want to give everybody access to this PowerPoint. So one thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to drop it in the chat. Okay. Oh, you're very welcome. So when I see some chats here, Terry's writing, in my office is a sign says, I'm waiting for that, Terry, but below that, it says, do you still do in-person VR training? In the past, VR reps would bring tools to show people how it feels to be blind, legally blind, hearing issue, and so on. If you were in the person of disability shoes, this is how it feels. I had a better understanding with that training. I would say we do offer some disability training, that's for sure, Donna. The type of training that you, I think, might be thinking of is in our assistive technology training, and we do offer that type of disability training still. So I would say, please contact me, and I think this is maybe a good time to show the last slide, which is our contact information. And then I want to get back to Terry because they did finish their comment and they said, in my office is a sign that says, disabilities have a name. You have a name. Which name defines you? Question mark. Oh, I love that. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that, Terry. And I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint. You've got our presenter contact information. The last slide of this PowerPoint, yes, like, am I saying this right? Yes, is well, it's a question. If you'd like some more Windmills training or this type of training that Mary's and I presented today, it is called Windmills training. It's disability awareness training. Again, not quite the type Donna was talking about where we're looking at actual items, but this is more about that thinking and about really getting at perceptions of disability. So again, if you would like any more for maybe your teams, your employers, employee, please reach out to us for Windmills disability training. Jody in a question had asked, can you speak briefly about accommodations and common misperceptions? I think, yeah, I think we have enough time certainly to give, I think, some good information. One, I think, was simply a statement that Mary had made in part of her facts, and that was in regards to accommodations. Most accommodations, people who ask for them, unfortunately, there's a fair amount of people who don't receive them, but typically reasonable accommodations cost little to no money. And so the word there is reasonable accommodations. And that's a word that a lot of employers, we had the opportunity, for example, to speak to Boeing about a month ago now, and they certainly were talking about accommodations. And so the one thing, just want folks to remember, it's about reasonable accommodations. And what I would also say is that in order for an individual, an employee, to receive an accommodation, they do have to share something about their disability. We refer to that as disclosure. And I would say that disclosure can be a little scary, especially if the individual and doesn't think that, they've never said anything about this disability and now they have to share. And you folks might know askjan.org, the Job Accommodation Network. I just put the site in the chat because they actually have a section for individuals, employees, employers, and like federal government employers. And in their section for employees, there's actually a very good section about how to request a reasonable accommodation. And how to even draft a letter, perhaps to an employer that speaks about what your need is. But I would say, just for myself, Jody, and then I'll certainly turn it over to Mary. I think the common misperception is that it's something great, big, and it's going to cost a lot of money.
So just dovetailing on what Natalie just ended with, the majority of the accommodations are less than $500. and employers actually can get a tax credit or a tax break on the taxes from the IRS when they do pay for accommodation for an individual. And there's all sorts of accommodations that are little or no cost at all. There's apps nowadays that help out individuals. I use an app when I go to the doctor's office and they're wearing the mask and I can't read their lips. So, and it's live transcribed. It's the app, it's free of charge. And I turn that on. I ask their permission, is it okay for me to turn this app on? Because I need to have a better understanding of what you're saying since I can't read your lips. So it may just be an app that's free, or it may be something else. And um, you can always ask VR to actually do a worksite assessment and help you decide what type of accommodations may be appropriate for the individual that you're hiring. But there are a lot of accommodations um, that are very minimal cost. And the best person that tell you what accommodation works best for them is usually the individual themselves. Because if they've worked before, they usually have already tried out different things. Like I tried out multiple headsets over the years, and I know Plantronic headsets work the best for me. So just asking an individual, they may already know, or you can get VR involved and we can assist with that. And I think you had another question, comment? Valerie?
Yes, yes. Sarah had asked what might be helpful for employers to take into consideration during the application/hiring process for people with disabilities. I know that one thing we've certainly heard, well, is I think one, asking perhaps, and thinking about the questions that are on that application. So for example, versus, are you an individual with a disability? Do you need anything? Do you have any need? I'm trying to think of how to pose it, but we talked about this and looking at those questions and making them less about the disability and more of just a general question. Do you need anything for the application, or if you have a need, that there's a, somebody or something to contact. I know a tip oftentimes, certainly because you may not know who comes walking through that door. And so I do think some very basic etiquette and becoming familiar, for example, with, if an individual is blind or has low vision, what might be some good tips. And we do actually have a Windmills training on reasonable accommodation. So I definitely want to put that out there. Because we talk about different reasonable accommodations, and participants actually, we do some activities to really think about some ideas. But so some of those etiquettes, for example, would just be mindful of being in the environment, how to ask somebody if they would like, if they need any assistance, offering somebody your elbow versus grabbing somebody or touching somebody without permission. If somebody is deaf or hard of hearing and happens to use ASL interpreter, speaking directly to the person and not the interpreter. And Mary, you came off mute. So was that it? I'm sorry. Was there something else?
No, so yeah, actually, if somebody's blind, don't shout at them. Just because they're blind doesn't mean they're deaf. And then also, if you're dealing with someone who says they're hard of hearing or even deaf, don't shout at them either, because it actually distorts the sound when you shout, especially if they're wearing hearing aids. And I know people think they're helping by talking really loud or shouting at them, but it's actually not helpful. And the human guide technique, if the individual is low vision or blind, using a cane or a guide dog might actually be a good thing, just to train your staff on how to be a human guide in case they do have someone that comes to the building that is blind. And then the one question I usually see is, can you perform the essential functions of the job with or without accommodation. That's usually the question on the applications that you can ask without, saying, do you have a disability? And one of the things that we do in Voc Rehab when we have interviews is we will have a printout of our questions and share it with the individual. And I kind of laugh and say it's a reverse accommodation because some people find me difficult to understand with my speech impairment related to my hearing loss. And I say, oh, we're making sure they understand the question, even if I'm the panelist asking the question. So that's one thing that we do and just a common practice. But you can look at universal design practices that you would just have some of those things set in place with any interview process, not just because somebody asked for it as an accommodation, whether it's large print or just having a copy of the questions available for them so they can refer to it during the interview process.
Thank you so much for adding that, Mary. And I just wanted to say, Sarah had said, let's do it for that reasonable accommodation session. So, and I wrote back, yes. So hopefully, I think, we are planning another session through this group, the Dream Job Fair, and we greatly appreciate the opportunity. So it sounds like we might be offering the next session on reasonable accommodations. And just as Mary mentioned, universal design, we talk about that a lot in that particular session. And I think people, they want to know more about universal design. And I know our colleague Stephanie's on the line, and I just have to give her a shout out because I agree with her. Universal design, changing our perceptions. We're just becoming better people. That's all that it's about, a better human, as she says. And I see our time is coming to a close here. It's 10:58, but I think about all the people that are on this session today. And I just want to thank you all for letting us come in today to, I think, sometimes maybe challenge thoughts and perceptions that are out there, and to really just hopefully have a takeaway for you today and think about this experience. And I greatly appreciate everybody for being here. Mary, was there any last comments you wanted to make before we let people go?
No, I just think that the windmill training, even if you are a disability agency, these trainings are actually helpful for all your staff, especially new staff, and just being more aware of different disabilities and how to interact with them, and more of that universal design concept. So thank you very much for the individuals that have all come in today and the ones that have actively participated in the chat and Q&A. We couldn't do this without you.
Absolutely. Seeing lots of thank yous. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We did record, and I'm going to just stop sharing here, and I'm going to stop recording.